What if the people Iran trusts most with its most dangerous are starting to disappear, and nobody in Tehran can fully explain why? 14 of the country's most skilled bomb experts walked into a field to do a job they had done thousands of times before. They never walked out, and the official explanation for what killed them raises more questions than it answers. Late in February, Israel and the United States launched a joint attack on Iran that nobody saw coming in its full scale. It was not a handful of missile strikes and a quick retaliation. It became a 40-day war that tore through the top of Iran's military and political structure in a way the country had never experienced before. Not even during its long war with Iraq decades earlier. Iran's supreme leader was killed in the very first wave of strikes hit directly at his own compound in Tehran. Think about that for a second. The single most protected man in the entire country, guarded by layers of security built specifically to prevent exactly this outcome, was gone within hours of the war beginning. That alone tells you how deep the intelligence failure went, and how completely Iran's enemies understood the inner workings of its own defenses. But he was not alone. The head of the Revolutionary Guard was killed. The top general running the entire armed forces was killed. The defense minister, a former Air Force commander with decades of experience, was killed. The man in charge of the National Defense Council was killed. The Iranian state media later confirmed that several of these leaders died together in the same room during the single defense council meeting. One strike. One room. Most of the people steering Iran's military were gone in an instant, as if an entire chain of command had simply been erased overnight. By the time a ceasefire finally stopped the fight in early April, Iran had lost more senior commanders in a few weeks than most countries have lost in a generation. This was not just a military setback. It was a leadership vacuum stretching across the military, the intelligence services, and the political system all at once. The people who knew how to run the machine, who held the institutional memory, who commanded loyalty and trust inside these organizations, they were simply not there anymore. And a government cannot function on titles alone. It needs people who actually know what they are doing. Iran had just lost an entire generation of them within a matter of weeks. And that broken, bleeding organization was still expected to clean up the physical mess the war left scattered across the country. Because a war like this does not end the moment the missiles stop falling. When you drop that much explosive power across a country in 40 days, not everything detonates the way it is designed to. Bombs get buried in soft ground and sit there, armed and waiting sometimes for months. Cluster munitions scatter smaller bomblets across huge areas, and a meaningful percentage of those never go off on impact. Mines drop from aircraft settle into fields, roads, and farmland hidden and completely unpredictable, waiting for the smallest disturbance to set them off. All of that leftover danger became Iran's problem to solve, and it became a massive one. State reports later confirmed that more than 200 hectares of land in just one province were contaminated with this kind of dangerous material, some of it buried as deep as 3 meters underground. Picture that scale for a moment. It is an area larger than most towns, saturated with hidden explosives, sitting right next to farmland where people still needed to grow food and raise families. The job of clearing all of that fell to specialized units inside the Revolutionary Guard, men trained for years to walk directly toward the most dangerous objects in the country and make them safe with their own hands. One of these teams operated out of Zanjan province in the northwest, a unit known as Ansar al-Mahdi. According to their own official numbers, this single unit had already cleared more than 15 Zaran-exploded devices since the war ended, including several massive American bunker buster bombs that had failed to detonate on impact. 15,000 devices cleared by one regional team in just a few months. That number alone should stop you for a moment, because it tells you just how much dangerous material was scattered across Iranian soil after this war and how much daily risk these specific men were absorbing on behalf of everyone else in the country. These were not new recruits learning on the job. Every person on this team was described as being among the most experienced, most specialized personnel the Revolutionary Guard had left after the war. The best of what remained after months of devastating losses at the top of the organization. On May 1st, that experience was not enough. The team was working to disarm a piece of unexploded ordnance when a massive blast tore through the area without warning. 14 of them were killed instantly. 2 more were seriously wounded. And when officials were asked what caused it, the explanation they gave was almost unbelievably thin. An unknown munition. That was essentially the entire explanation coming from an organization that had just successfully handled 15 0 similar devices without a single incident of this scale. Sit with that contradiction for a moment, because it matters more than it first appears. This was not a team stumbling blindly into danger they did not understand. This was Iran's most capable bomb disposal unit in that region, with a proven track record and years of hands-on experience between them. And still, in a single moment, 14 of their best people were gone with almost no real explanation given to the public, and possibly very little explanation given to their own grieving families either. Some reporting has suggested the explosive material involved was a mix of cluster bombs and dare-drop mines left behind from the war, exactly the kind of unstable, unpredictable ordnance that makes this work so brutally dangerous, even for the most experienced experts. That detail helps explain how an accident like this could happen. It does not fully explain why a team this skilled, working with this much recent experience clearing similar devices, would still lose 14 people in one single event. Among the dead was a senior commander who had spent years working specifically in bomb disposal, a veteran sapper, whose entire career had been built around exactly this kind of dangerous technical work. Losing someone with that level of specific experience is not something an organization simply recovers from by promoting the next person in line. That knowledge, built over years of handling live explosives, does not transfer easily, and in many cases, it cannot be transferred at all. There is also something worth remembering here about how this kind of quiet, unexplained loss has played out inside Iran before, long before this war ever started. Iranian scientists connected to sensitive programs have died under strange circumstances, sometimes labeled as accidents, sometimes never fully explained at all. Iran's own history is filled with moments where the official story felt thinner than the reality on the ground, and where the true cause of a death or an explosion only came out much later, if it ever came out publicly at all. That history is exactly why so many people, both inside and outside Iran, treat a vague explanation like an unknown munition with a healthy amount of suspicion rather than simple acceptance. Now here is a question worth sitting with for a second. If you were inside Iran's security establishment right now, already reeling from months of catastrophic losses at the very top, and you heard that 14 more of your most trusted specialists had just died from something your own officials could only describe as unknown, how exactly would that make you feel about the state of your own organization? To understand why this incident carries so much weight, you need to look closely at the environment it landed in. This did not happen inside a calm, stable organization simply absorbing one unfortunate accident. It happened inside a security apparatus that was already deeply wounded, already suspicious of itself, and already struggling to hold together after losing so much of its top leadership in a single devastating war. Think about the sheer scale of what the Revolutionary Guard had already lost before this explosion ever happened. Its commander-in-chief, gone. Its top general, gone. Its defense minister, gone. Dozens of senior officials across the military and intelligence world gone within the same short window of time. Every one of those people represented years, sometimes decades, of specialized knowledge that cannot simply be replaced by handing someone a new title and a new office. You cannot rebuild that kind of institutional expertise overnight, no matter how badly you need to, and no matter how much pressure comes from the top to look like nothing has changed. Now add 14 more of your most skilled remaining specialists to that same pile of losses, and a single accident your own officials cannot clearly explain. Every additional loss makes the organization weaker, slower, and less capable of doing the dangerous technical work the entire country desperately needs right now, at exactly the moment it can least afford to lose anyone at all. But there is a second layer to this story, and it is the part that should genuinely unsettle you the most. In the weeks and months after the war, reports began surfacing about growing paranoia inside Iran's own security services. After such a devastating intelligence failure allowed enemy strikes to kill so many top commanders in one single blow, officers reportedly became terrified of being suspected themselves. Even small complaints of minor criticism of leadership were apparently enough to trigger accusations of spying or secretly working with foreign powers. Trust inside the organization had reportedly collapsed to a genuinely dangerous degree, with people afraid to speak honestly even to their own colleagues. Now picture dropping an unexplained explosion directly into that exact environment. 14 specialists died. The official cause is described only as an unknown munition. In an organization already primed to see betrayal and sabotage lurking everywhere, that kind of vague explanation does not calm anyone down. It does the opposite. It feeds the fear, and it gives every existing suspicion a fresh reason to grow stronger. Was this genuinely a tragic accident, an unstable piece of leftover ordnance behaving exactly as unpredictably as these devices always can behave? That is entirely possible. And honestly, it may be the most likely explanation given everything we already know about how dangerous this kind of clearance work is under the best of circumstances. But inside an organization this shaken, this suspicious of itself, even a straightforward accident can start to look like something darker to the people living through it. Could it have been sabotage from within their own ranks? Could it have been a device deliberately designed to look like leftover ordnance? Nobody outside Iran's own leadership can say for certain right now, and based on the vague statements released so far, it is fair to wonder whether Iran's own leadership fully understands what actually happened either. This is not the only strange. I'd explain loss inside the Iran security world during the same general period. A former representative connected to a unit responsible for cracking down on internal dissent reportedly died under circumstances that state media never bothered to explain to the public. No cause of death was given at all, despite his connections to some of the most sensitive parts of the security establishment. Separately, officials overseeing one of Iran's most notorious prisons publicly admitted that a number of the people held inside had gone unaccounted for following recent unrest. These are not small, forgettable details. These are Iranian officials themselves openly admitting they do not have a full and complete picture of what is happening within their own walls. Think about how this looks from the outside for a moment, from the perspective of an ordinary Iranian soldier or officer watching all of this unfold in real time. First, your top leadership is wiped out in a single devastating war. Then a former security figure with sensitive connections dies with no explanation at all. Then prison officials admit they cannot even account for everyone in custody. And now 14 of your most skilled colleagues are killed in an incident your own command can only describe using vague words. At what point does a reasonable person sitting inside that organization start to wonder whether the people in charge actually know what is happening, or whether they are simply as confused and frightened as everyone underneath them? Line these incidents up next to each other, and a pattern slowly starts to form. An organization that keeps losing people under unclear circumstances, and keeps offering the public incomplete or vague explanations whenever it happens. Maybe every single one of these cases has a genuinely innocent explanation on its own. Maybe some of them do not. What matters most right now is that a government already struggling hard to project strength cannot seem to give clear, confident answers about losses happening inside its own ranks. That kind of uncertainty is exactly the thing that breeds fear at every level of an organization, from the lowest-ranking soldier all the way up to the people making decisions in Tehran. There is also a human cost to this story that goes far beyond questions of regime stability. And it deserves real attention entirely on its own. 15,000 unexploded devices cleared by just one provincial unit tells you exactly how much danger is still sitting quietly in the ground across Iran right now, waiting. Cluster bomblets and mines do not become safe just because a ceasefire agreement was signed on paper somewhere far away. They stay alive, they stay unstable, and they stay lethal, buried in farmland, hidden near roads, sitting in places where ordinary families walk through every single day without any idea of what lies beneath their feet. Iran's most trained, most experienced specialists can still be killed doing this exact work months after the war technically ended. Imagine the risk facing ordinary civilians who have none of that training, and the none of that protective equipment, farmers walking their own fields to check on crops, children playing outside near their homes, people simply trying to return to some version of normal life in provinces that absorbed heavy bombing during the war. This threat is not going away anytime soon, and it will likely keep quietly costing lives long after this particular news cycle moves on to something else entirely. There's one more angle worth considering here, and it is one that rarely gets enough attention and coverage. Clearing unexploded ordnance is not glamorous work. It rarely makes headlines the way a missile strike or a dramatic assassination does, but it is arguably one of the most important jobs happening inside Iran right now, because every single device these teams fail to find and neutralize represents a future tragedy waiting to happen to someone who has nothing to do with the war at all. When an organization doing this critical, unglamorous work suffers a catastrophic loss like this one, the ripple effects extend far beyond the 14 families directly affected. Fewer experienced hands means slower clearance. Slower clearance means more contaminated land sitting untouched for longer. And more contaminated land sitting untouched means more risk for the civilians who live nearby and have absolutely no choice but to keep living their lives around it. Minus now step back and look at the bigger picture. Because this single explosion is landing on top of an extraordinary pile of pressure already facing Iran's government from every direction at once. It is trying to convince its own population and its allies across the wider region that it is still strong and still fully in control despite losing most of its top military and political leadership in a matter of weeks. It has a new supreme leader who has barely appeared in public since taking the position, reportedly still recovering from injuries suffered in the very same strikes that killed his own predecessor. It is trying to manage fragile, uncertain talks with the United States while facing open resistance from hardline factions inside its own government who do not want any meaningful compromise at all. It is dealing with a self-created crisis involving mines scattered in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important shipping routes on the planet, a crisis that continues to complicate its relationships with almost every country in the region. Now, sitting right on top of every single one of those existing pressures, it has lost 14 more of its most capable remaining specialists in an incident it still cannot properly explain to its own people, let alone to the rest of the world watching closely. Any one of these problems on its own would be a serious challenge for a stable, fully functioning government to manage carefully. facing every single one of them at exactly the same time, while still trying hard to look strong and fully in control in front of the entire watching world, is exactly the kind of pressure that creates the fear and paranoia we keep seeing clear signs of inside Iran's own institutions right now. So where does that leave us? Based on everything currently known and reported, officially the Zanjan explosion is still being described as a tragic accident caused by an unstable piece of leftover ordnance during a routine but extremely dangerous clearance operation. Iran's broader unexploded ordnance crisis is far from over, and specialized teams across the country still working every single day to locate and safely destroy thousands of additional dangerous devices scattered throughout multiple provinces. The deeper leadership crisis triggered by the war remains largely unresolved, with no clear end in sight, a supreme leader who is barely seen in public, a security apparatus increasingly defined by eternal suspicion, unexplained losses, and quiet fear spreading among its own people, and a broader question hanging over all of it that nobody outside Iran's own government can currently answer with full confidence, whether incidents like this, what are simply tragic accidents born from an enormous and genuine cleanup challenge, or whether they are symptoms of something far more troubling happening deep inside the country's own security establishment. What we do know with real confidence is this: the Iran standing today is simply not the same country that existed before this war began. It is a government that lost the overwhelming majority of its most senior military and intelligence leadership in a matter of weeks, and now finds itself unable to fully explain even the deaths of the specialists it has left. A government still cleaning up the physical wreckage of a war that keeps quietly claiming more lives months after the rest of the world stopped paying close attention to what is happening there. Think for a moment about the families of these 14 sons, husbands, fathers, brothers, people who spent years training for one of the most dangerous jobs a person can do, who accepted that risk every single time they walked toward a live explosive device. Their families likely understood the danger of this work better than almost anyone, but understanding a risk and receiving a vague, unsatisfying explanation for why that risk finally caught up with someone you love are two very different things. Somewhere in Zanjan province right now, real families are grieving. Real people are waiting for answers that their own government does not seem able, or perhaps does not seem willing to give them. And that is really the deepest problem sitting underneath this entire story. It is not just about one explosion, or even about 14 deaths, as tragic as that number is on its own. It is about what happens to a government, and to the people serving inside it, when it starts to erode from every direction at once. When soldiers cannot fully trust their commanders. When commanders cannot fully trust their intelligence services. When intelligence services cannot fully trust each other. That kind of internal breakdown does not announce itself with a single dramatic moment. It shows up quietly, one unexplained incident at a time, one vague statement at a time. The cracks become impossible to hide, even from an outside audience watching from thousands of miles away. 14 of Iran's most experienced bomb specialists walked into a field they had walked into countless times before without incident. This time, none of the usual outcomes applied. And the men who understood this dangerous work better than almost anyone else in the country never made it back out. Somewhere inside Tehran right now, people with far more power and far more information than any of us are quietly asking the exact same question we started with. What really happened in that field? And what does it actually mean for everything that comes next for a government already standing on such uncertain ground? Because if the people responsible for clearing the physical remnants of war are dying in ways their own leadership cannot explain, then the deeper question is not just about one explosion in one province. It is about whether the institutions that are supposed to hold this country together are still capable of doing so, or whether they are quietly coming apart from the inside, one unanswered question at a time.